Hi, welcome to the Trauma Thrivers podcast. Delighted to have you with us. I'm Lebentz, your host, a psychotherapist, a trauma expert, and a survivor myself. Lovely to have you with us. The Trauma Thrivers podcast is for anybody who has been through any sort of developmental trauma or who has complex PTSD. This podcast aims to help educate, inspire, and support those of us that are on a trauma healing journey. We've got stories, steps, and various solutions to trauma to help you heal. If you'd like more information or tips or tools or strategies, please go to traumathrivers.com. You can also find this podcast on my YouTube channel, Lebentz Trauma Thrivers. If you'd like to join our community of thrivers, please find us on Facebook under Trauma Thrivers. Hi, welcome to the Trauma Thrivers podcast. It's so lovely to have you here. And tonight, I am very delighted to introduce you to a real podcast king, dare I say, called Guy Macpherson. Guy runs the Trauma Therapist podcast, and he's been doing it for years, and he is an expert in the trauma field. And if you haven't checked out his podcast yet, I really suggest that you do so. But here's Melanie Curtis and I interviewing Guy for the Trauma Thrivers podcast and also for our Facebook group. If you're not already a member of our Facebook group, we'd love to see you over there at Trauma Thrivers. Take care for now and hope you enjoy this episode. Good evening, Trauma Thrivers. Welcome. Hello. We've got sparkly jumpers on again. So
I'm red. Does that count?
It counts. It counts. Guy, have you got any Santa Claus or anything on your...
doing the angel thing.
We love it.
As you can clearly see.
Yeah, lovely.
Brilliant.
Listen, we're really delighted that you joined us tonight. Obviously, I've been a huge fan for a long time, so I feel a little bit starstruck having you, in the Trauma Thrivers group.
You're talking about me?
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Talking about you.
So, who's she talking about?
Yeah, you. Let me tell everybody who you are if they don't know you. So Guy has a PhD. He's also a husband, a father of two, and holds a doctorate in clinical psychology. In 2014, while working at a clinic in Northern California, assessing and treating young individuals with early psychosis, Guy founded the Trauma Therapist Project with the goals of raising awareness of trauma and creating an educational and supportive community for new trauma therapists. And for anybody watching, if you haven't signed up for the Trauma Therapist project and podcast, it is amazing. The Trauma Therapist Project has now grown to include the podcast, which is being listened to in more than 160 countries around the world, and Trauma Therapist 2.0, which is an online membership community specifically dedicated to educating and inspiring new trauma therapists. Guy's also got the Trauma Therapist newsletter, which is a monthly subscription filled with information and inspiration for trauma therapists everywhere. Guy's focus, which is what really we want to speak to him about tonight, is on honouring and cultivating the authenticity, vulnerability, and courage of trauma therapists. Now, if you're not a trauma therapist, because only half the group is, we're still going to be talking to you tonight because we're going to be talking about your own therapy and you finding a trauma-informed practitioner, and so it will be relevant, so don't go away. Welcome, Guy. Cool.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks for that. And this topic just doesn't pertain to trauma therapists or coaches. Obviously, this, and I think this is one of the things that really excites me about it, is just if you're a human being, this is important.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're someone who has experienced trauma and you're looking for a therapist or you're undergoing therapy, obviously this is really crucial too.
Yeah. Amazing. So where should we start? Mel, do you want to ask the first question of Guy?
Well, I think something that, we always like to kind of lead with is our audience sort of getting to know you a little bit. And so we just like to ask what led you into the trauma field to start with.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, when I was really young, when I was in like, I think fifth grade, sixth grade, I was bullied in my life. And that experience just jacked me up. It impacted my self-esteem. It impacted my the trajectory of my life, of how I showed up in relationships and so forth. And I didn't realize that until I was a lot older.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a kind of an unconscious driver for me to want to help, quote unquote, help other people. When I got into graduate school, I knew I wanted to focus on trauma. I felt as though I could walk into that circle and be with someone who had experienced trauma and sit there and be and listen and be a witness. I felt that I could do that. I didn't know if I could, but I felt like I could do that. And that was one of the things that really drove me to do this and to get into the field. Do you want me to stop there?
No, I was fascinated that you started with kind of psychosis. So did you do clinical psychology and then you started working with psychosis?
Exactly.
Something I've been through. So
exactly.
I'm always fascinated by psychosis, really, and trauma and the link.
Yeah. And there is a link. When I got out of graduate school, that was my first job. We were treating young kids who were showing early signs of psychosis, and not surprisingly, or maybe surprisingly for some of your viewers and listeners, 99.9% of those individuals, those young kids who were showing early signs of psychosis. And when we talk about that, just briefly, we're talking about, maybe hearing whispers and hearing voices or seeing shadows, that you're kind of wondering whether they're real or not. So those are kind of the symptoms of early psychosis. But 99% of those individuals had experienced trauma.
Yeah.
And part of that job at that point was taking referral calls from parents, from teachers, from other therapists to see if their young kid would be appropriate for our program. And, we would have this list of questions that we would have to ask, what's the behavior been like? What's the arc of the behavior? Has there been a decrease in functioning, blah, blah, blah. And when we got around to, asking about, well, have they experienced trauma? And a lot of people are like, no, haven't been sexually assaulted or raped, or I haven't been in a car accident, or I haven't been in combat, right? That's oftentimes people, when you say that word, that's what, not everyone, but a lot of times people associate that with trauma. But when we dug in there, you found out that, well, there was witnessing to domestic violence. There was X and Y and Z and so forth. And I was blown away that, and kind of understandably, a lot of parents don't understand that or realize that, but I was blown away that so many of these kids were experiencing trauma, and it was going undetected and unnoticed. And that was how I started the podcast. Wanted to get the word out.
Yeah. And so the podcast started, and then you've had something like over 500 episodes, which is a fair few, right?
Right.
So, and mainly with trauma experts. I mean, you've interviewed some of the best trauma people in the world, I would say.
Right. And initially my goal was to, when I was at this job, I was working, I was doing a lot of commuting, and like an hour and a half each way. And I was listening to podcasts, and I was thinking to myself, about my clients, why aren't they listening to me? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not cut out for this. And at the same time, I was listening to a lot of podcasts about entrepreneurs doing it, doing incredible things with their lives and creating the life they wanted. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if I had a mentor sitting beside me in the passenger seat who, while I was commuting, could help me with my clients. Mm-hmm. And, at the time I said, I was going through sensory motor psychotherapy training. Janina Fisher was the primary teacher there. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be awesome if I had her there? Anyway, so I put two and two together and said, what if I started my own podcast? I'd never done anything like this before. And my goal was to interview who I thought would be master trauma therapists, right? Yeah. And initially it was to bring on these really super seasoned people to help other people like myself who were just starting out. But things shifted, and it has become not just about bringing on Pat Ogden or Janina Fisher or whomever, but bringing on people who are passionate about helping others who've been impacted by trauma. That's what it is for me.
Yeah, lovely. So it's developed and kind of morphed. And in all those years of listening and your own training, this is a massive question, but it kind of hopefully leads into where we want to go, is what are the most valuable kind of skills or things that you've learned about trauma and what helps to heal it?
Yeah, this does lead perfectly into it, because when I first started, when I was in graduate school and I got out of graduate school, I had this degree and I felt like I needed to be and present myself like a psychologist. You can imagine, I don't know, for me, it was, I had to be proper. I had to have all the answers. Yeah. Right. I had to have all the answers. I had to be composed. And again, this is how I defined it and internalized it. And it was so kind of confining to me because, well, let me take a step back. When I got into graduate school, I felt like I needed to just cram information and knowledge into my head, that was going to make me the best trauma therapist I could become. What book do I need to read? What workshop do I need to go to? What teacher do I need to talk to that's going to help me do this? Because I had gone back to school when I was in graduate school. I was like 36. So I was kind of, a non-traditional student. I had been in therapy. I thought I kind of had that down. I thought I had my inner work down. I don't need to do that. I mean, I understood the importance of it, but I didn't realize really how crucial it was, not just for trauma treatment and healing, but also as a person seeking help. It wasn't until I started doing the podcast and I started interviewing people. And one of the questions I would always ask was if you could share an early clinical error and what you learned from it. And I thought that I would be getting responses like, well, this technique didn't work, or I forgot about that technique, or, I forgot Pat Ogden's page 222 of her book, or Bessel van der Kolk's book. But it wasn't that. It was more and more people were sharing that they weren't able to show up as themselves. Yeah. They felt they couldn't just simply be themselves. And that in turn ruptured the relationship. And that was really eye-opening for me.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, actually. And I guess some of the reason why I went into coaching as opposed to therapy, because I think there is that there, as a therapist, I think there's this need to be seen. There's very much this kind of stigma sometimes within the therapy world to be seen. I remember, early on in my therapy, my own healing journey, one of my therapists telling me how, you know, she doesn't wear jewelry or makeup or anything because she needs to present, you know, as a kind of blank canvas. And I think I must have asked her a question that led to her telling me that. And I always remembered that, because I remember thinking, when I started down this line sort of for my career, thinking, I don't want to be like that. You know, I want to be able to show up in my red jumper or in my whatever it is, and to give my clients a piece of me. So that I find that really, really interesting. And actually, I wanted to ask Lou.
Can I just say something about that point as well? Because I really resonate with Guy, and I feel like, well, I also feel like what therapist really ever feels, or coach, or somebody in our shoes, the other side, ever feels like they know enough or they're good enough. You know, I mean, I don't know, maybe they are out there watching. If they are, please let me know, because it feels like it's an eternal journey. But I think I mean, 20, 25 years ago, I agree that the therapist, you know, had to hide photos and had to wear certain things, maybe some, but that psychodynamic, psychoanalytical, slightly reserved, we've all learned, thank God, through Porges and polyvagal and connection and Dan Siegel and interpersonal neurobiology, that actually we don't have to be any of those things, do we? Right. We just have to be and connect with the client as ourselves, right, in our humanity. So is that something that you've learned, the more the relational model?
Right. And the problem I had with that was, what do you mean? Why am I in school? You know, and the whole knowledge piece was so important to me, because when I was younger, I felt I got the message and I kind of internalized that I wasn't smart enough. Yeah. And so I needed to rely on that piece. And the issue that I had was that when I first started really integrating what you both are talking about here, I was scared, because I felt that I wasn't just who I wasn't good enough. And that, to me, is kind of my message right now is and again, I want to couch everything I'm saying here with the understanding that boundaries are important and ethics are important. Of course they are. And knowledge is important. I'm not saying forget what you've learned, but rather than clutching your suitcase of knowledge, so clinging onto it so tightly when you work with a client, which is what I did, rather than doing that, just have it there, you know, at the ready. And there's so much power in simply, and this isn't always easy, being who you are, you know, honoring the peaks and valleys of our story, our own story, and our own experiences. And that requires, right, doing your own inner work, looking at your own traumas, looking at your fears, looking at your biases, and being able to sit with those. Because if you're working with someone who's been impacted by trauma as a therapist or coach, you are going to be triggered. It's unquestioning, right? It's a matter of when. But let me just say this and I'll stop. One of my guests said to me, this is so important, what we're talking about here, you know, this honing of authenticity, being able to show up as who you are, not as Guy the therapist or Guy the clinician, but Guy. Being able to do that is not just beneficial for you as a therapist or a coach, but it allows the client, the thriver, to know that they are making a difference in someone else's life, that their being, that their presence is impacting someone else.
Yeah, and I hear that so loud and clear, Guy, and I think that you know, authenticity and connection are two things that, you know, are, for me as a practitioner, my highest values, but also for me as a human being. So, you know, it is that kind of integration of both of them, with the boundaries and all the other good stuff that goes in it. And I think what I'd like to hear from you, and also from Lou actually, is how trauma impacts the ability to be able to express that authenticity, or to have that authenticity in the first place.
Right. You want to go, Lou?
I can go first. I mean, I think it impacts authenticity, because I think when we're traumatized, you know, we spend a lot of our time in our adapted selves, or our parts, or our critical parent, or our wounded child, and we don't have a sense often of who our real self is underneath all of that, who our adult self is. So I think, you know, it's very difficult to be vulnerable. It's very difficult to be courageous if we're not tapped into our adult. And sometimes the layers are that we think that we are the not good enough ones, or we think that we are the unlovable ones, rather than those are our child parts or our adapted teenage parts. And actually, the most important thing for me to get to authenticity is that comes through your adult. You know, you can start to be more authentic when you realize that, yeah, these parts of you are just parts of you, but they're not really who you are at your core.
Mm-hmm.
That's my quick take.
Yeah, well said. And you know, also, I think it depends on the trauma that a person has experienced too. You know, if we're talking about interpersonal trauma, which is sometimes, not all the times, but oftentimes done in a under the guise of trust and safety, it's very difficult for someone to have that trust again, to have that self-trust again. The other issue here is a lot of times therapists, coaches, whomever, they're helping people get into this field because of very laudable reasons, right? They want to help. We want to help. We want to fix. We want to cure. We want to prevent. We want to take away the pain. And, you know, someone said to me, one of my guests said to me, you know, when I said this, you know, and she wasn't talking to me personally, but she said, how dare you, you know, think that you can take away someone, that is even your job to take away someone else's pain. And I was like, well, you know, isn't that what you're supposed? No, you know, she said to me, that person who's come into the therapist's office has most likely started their healing journey way before they got to you, you know, and to be able to be a witness, to be able to sit and listen and be a guide in a sense is so powerful. But it's not the easiest thing for a lot of people. It's very challenging because people don't, you know, when you talk about a therapist or you talk about a coach, you know, and then you suggest, well, you know, it's important for them to do their own inner work oftentimes. And for me, it's like, wait a minute, I got to do my own stuff. I'm here to help this person. Why do I have to do my own stuff? Because if you don't, you're not able to show up as who you are. Look, when we're talking to someone, you know, as a human being, when we meet someone who is just authentic, they're just themselves, they're comfortable, we're amazed, we're attracted to them because they're just in the moment. It's so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you both, but I mean, having had about 25 years of different therapists, maybe more, you know, I've always felt with mine, and the people that I've done the most healing work are the people that can hold the space in their own embodiment, and that none of my feelings or somatic stuff phases them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that I was talking, funnily enough, having a conversation with a friend about this just the other day. And I think, one of the things that I have noticed about being a coach is the ability, because of the life experience that I've had, the fact that my clients can tell me anything and they will never see that shocked, that shocked or surprised look that most people will take as judgment,
Right.
is just so beneficial.
Right.
And I think that it's, if we can, like Lou was saying, if we can just hold that space, without our clients feeling judged in any way, I think that is hugely, hugely powerful, because that is essentially what they're healing from.
Right. I agree. I totally agree that feeling of judgment is so well, I should say, not having that feeling of like you're being judged is so crucial to that healing process.
And that leads me into, Guy, what do you think? Because I mean, what do you think about vulnerability? And I'm gonna a bit more, because I know that you think highly of vulnerability, and I'm gonna speak on both ends of it, having at times in the last couple of decades, at the very right moment and for the benefit of the client or who I'm speaking to, I've shared, and in some therapeutic worlds, that's not okay. And then also, having worked in a treatment center in 12-step recovery world more, I found sometimes that there are people that overshare. Right. So I just wonder what we think about therapist vulnerability, and in fact, vulnerability on the healing journey, full stop, really.
Yeah. And I would make a distinction between vulnerability and self-disclosure too.
Okay.
Because I also think it's context. It's all context.
Yeah.
I think it's important for therapists to be able to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? I mean, for me, it means being able to feel, to show that. Yeah. And I think, that's really important. And it might not be important for other people. So I think we have to set that too. And I think for therapists, they have to be able to determine what that person sitting in front of them, that client, is able to accept, is willing to accept, is needed, is necessary. But I think this all comes back to being able to be a human being. I think that's very powerful to. And again, this is where the art comes in of therapy, is knowing when to reveal that, to disclose that, to show that, and when not to. But I think it's very powerful to know that, if I'm a client, for me, I want to feel that the person if I'm sitting in front of a therapist, or if I'm sitting in front of a coach, whoever, that's a real person. Yeah. And that might mean, that's going to mean different things to different people. Yeah. So I think that's important. But I think, I think there's a certain level, there's a baseline of vulnerability and self-disclosure that I think in this time, in this age, people resonate with. When I say being real, let me just read something. There's this amazing quote by Eugene Gendlin, who was the founder of, or creator of, focusing, one of the techniques, and he was a philosopher. But he said the essence of working with another person is to be present as a living being. And that's lucky, because if we had to be smart or good or mature or wise, then we would probably be in trouble. But what matters is not that. What matters is to be a human being with another human being, and to recognize the other person as another being in there. And to me, that is it. And that wasn't it when I first started. I thought, that you had to have, all those techniques ready to go. And again, I'm not saying you don't need that knowledge, but there's just something so profound about being in the presence of someone who is able, like you were saying, Mel, is able to listen and without judgment, and to sit in that fire in a sense, and to not even say it, but to embody it's going to be okay. That's very profound, I think.
So for therapists that are part of your network, what kind of advice do you give to them about their own trauma healing and their own, what they can do to be that very open listener, embodied and there? Are there some things that you suggest to them that are good for their own personal development?
I mean, my suggestion, and which many of my guests have, echoed, is to do your own work, to look at be willing to look at your own traumas, to explore your own experiences. I talked about my own bullying when I was younger. It wasn't really until I started doing the podcast and my guests were talking about their own experiences that I really became comfortable with speaking about it. And understanding, despite the fact that I had been in therapy, understanding the real impact of it. That is crucial, to be able to do that. To understand that it's not a matter of if, but when you will be triggered, and to have done your own inner work such that when you are triggered, you're not dealing with that. You're able to maintain a certain amount of composure, and also really getting clear on why you're doing this work, for whatever reason it is, whether it's to help, to fix, to cure, and to get clear on that, and to understand that a large part of this is not about you. It's and again, everything I'm saying, I was guilty of, in a sense. I really wanted to help and to fix and to cure, and didn't understand that oftentimes that's not the journey. That's not the therapist's job, is to take away that pain, in a sense.
I think we have to look at our own codependency as therapists and why we went into the work. And I particularly resonate that the beginning of my career in therapy, I mean, I think I would have been labeled a chronic codependent. Chronic, and you have to do the work of letting go, because that's really not in service, is it, to anybody? And also because I think people can feel that controlling element, or that you're invested in how fast they get better or when they get better. Right. And that is just so unhelpful.
Right. Because that's a reflection on you.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Right.
Totally. Yeah. I think the taking it personally when people don't. I think my first kind of insight into helping others was probably through a 12-step program. So well before I ever, got into, being a practitioner myself, sort of being a sponsor in a 12-step program. And at that point, I hadn't really done the work that I needed to do. So if I had a sponsee and they relapsed, like, my God, it was all my fault. And what didn't I do? And then I could take it personally. Why didn't they call me? It must be, all of that stuff that goes on, that I think if I had had clients at that stage, I mean, it would have just been a horrible mess.
Yeah.
That's honesty for you.
Yeah.
So for anybody listening that's not a therapist or a coach, if they were choosing, or when they are choosing a therapist or a coach, do you have any tips on what they should be looking for?
Yeah. Don't give up. It's hard. It's hard to find a therapist you connect with.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people go to a therapist or talk to a therapist on the phone or whatever, and it doesn't work out. It doesn't feel good. And then they're like, well, therapy isn't for me. Don't give up. There is someone out there that is going to be a good fit for you. And if you don't feel it, go to the next one. And I think that's really important, is to trust your gut in this. Find that courage to trust yourself, because it's not easy. It's not easy to have that gut sense that this is right. And I would just say, don't stop until you get that, because once you do, it's going to feel amazing. It's going to be like magic.
Yeah.
And that's just the magic of that genuine connection, really, you know?
Yeah.
And what does it feel like, sort of from the other side? So, if we were sort of reversing the question, because I think, as a practitioner, sometimes, we can get a client that comes to us and we're, I don't know. So, again, like what's the kind of reverse of that? And, what should we be looking for?
Lou, you want to respond to that first, or?
Well, I will respond to that, but what I suppose I will say is that it's never my job to actually really, I don't ever say, unless it's completely out of my realm of specialism, I don't usually say to somebody, I'm not going to work with you, because also I feel a bit like any other relationships, sometimes after a while, you can really gel into a relationship with somebody that initially it might be a little bit uncomfortable, but I've often found 2 or 3 or 4 sessions in, you actually can warm to somebody and they can warm to you. So I don't know. I personally, I've got to be honest, in 2 decades with people, there have only been 1 or 2 people that I've really felt I'm not the right, I cannot work with you. And in which case I have referred them on, but it's very unusual for me. I mean, obviously some of my clients and some people I've worked with, there's like 100% connection, and I feel very warm and very, very, very deeply heart connected to, and others maybe 70 or 80%. But for me, I always feel the connection's there on some level. Maybe that's a cop out, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion to, if therapists are feeling that, is to again make a distinction between whether the scope of treatment is maybe out of your zone. That might be one thing, but what you're talking about, Lou, I completely agree with too. So
they in a way, I always still believe that we're not the guru ever, and that we are simply the mirror. We're simply the mirror, and that really safe connection. And sometimes it takes a while to feel that safe connection, doesn't it, Guy? Because as you were saying earlier, people have never had a safe connection in some instances. So to learning just to trust us, takes time.
Right.
Yeah. So what next for you? We know that the podcast is it 30,000 downloads a week or something phenomenal, or has it gone up even more than that now?
A week is about 40.
Yes. It's a lot. It's a lot.
30.
It's a lot.
So I'm doing about 130,000 downloads a month.
So you are educating a lot of trauma therapists, which is just phenomenal.
I don't know what I'm doing. No,
Well, you're doing something right.
I'm doing something.
Yeah.
I think I want to inspire people to feel like they can do this and they can be themselves to do this.
Yeah.
And I want to get the word out about trauma is happening. It's going on. It's crazy.
But you see, I think trauma is going on everywhere and in a lot of people. And I also wish in a way that we'd kind of knock out the mental health label and even the addiction or the eating disorders or the depression and the anxiety, and we would just treat the trauma, you know, or the dysregulation in the nervous system, and that, you know, treatment centers and therapists and all of us were trained in trauma so that we all know how to deal with it and spot it compassionately in each other.
Right. I agree with that.
One day, hey.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting proposition. You know, what you're saying is to kind of supplant the mental health label with what? Trauma?
Yeah, because what does mental health mean?
Right,
and trauma, we know mostly is a dysregulation because of a lack of co-regulation and attachment.
Yeah.
Just nobody knows that they're dysregulated and that those early experiences. But if we could change the field, I mean, Mel and I are organizing with some people here in the UK, hopefully next year in September, a trauma conference, and we've got some big speakers over here speaking in the addiction and the mental health fields, so that we can start to get people to go, well, actually, it's not depression that I've got, or an anxiety disorder, or it's underlying trauma, and I need to look at that.
Right. Well, of course, Gabor Mate is pretty famous for saying that, you know, it's
just
underlying addiction. There's always trauma.
Yeah.
You know, so.
When will the world listen? Yeah. It's listening more.
I think it is slowly. It's slowly listening. So.
Yeah. And what next for you?
What next for me? Well, the newsletter is my latest focus, you know, putting together again information that not only provides, I think, support, but also inspiration for therapists and people in the field. And that's it. I don't know what is going to be in the new year. I'm thinking of kind of shifting things a little, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but you know, I just love doing what I'm doing. This is, you know, you guys got me going. You can, hopefully you can feel it.
We like that. We like that.
I love talking about this.
Well, we love talking to you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time. Mel, have we got any questions, or have you got anything else to ask of Guy before we say thank you and good night?
We've got some comments, but no questions. So yeah, if you're watching it on replay and you have any questions, then just pop them in, and Lou and I will, as ever, come and reply to you. And yeah, just let us know.
Yeah. And in the meantime, Guy, thank you. Thank you for your time and energy. And we hope you're going to come into the Trauma Thrivers group more often. We'll try and grab you back at some point, hopefully.
I appreciate it. It's an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope it helped you in some way, and I really hope to see you back here soon. If you have anything to share on today's experience or podcast, please nip over to the YouTube channel or the Facebook group Trauma Thrivers and let us know there.